Okay, hello and welcome everyone. I'm Sarah Kwan, the co-founder and president of Lean In Canada. It's a very special evening for us here tonight, and we're thrilled to have some incredibly successful and influential women joining us, not only on the stage, but also in our audience. I'm delighted to see, along with some cherished familiar faces, that we have a lot of new attendees as well. So for those of you who are new to our organization, Lean In Canada is a community of professional women empowering each other to build purposeful and fulfilling careers. We started in 2013 as a small group of 20 women hoping to share our experiences and expertise with each other, and have since grown into a network of 2,800. As we near our 4th anniversary, I've been reflecting on what Lean In means to me. This is not only a global movement with sister chapters all around the world in such places as China, France, Mongolia, Romania, South Africa, and Ireland, but it is also a deeply internal movement within each of us to confidently tackle bold challenges for ourselves and generously make space at the table for others, so we can achieve our greatest potential together. This year, we are also undertaking a very exciting initiative, which is the launch of our Vancouver chapter, and we hope eventually to connect women from coast to coast. Lean In Canada is 100% volunteer run, and at this time, I'd like to invite all the members of our team to stand up and raise their hands. Where are you guys? Don't be shy. I know there's more of us. I'm so proud of everything we've achieved together, and thank you for your passion and hard work in building this community with us. I'd also like to thank some of the companies whose generosity as national sponsors enables us to continue making these events accessible to a diverse audience. Secret, Crow Soberman, TD Bank, 108 Idea Space, and Ivy Business School. At this time, I'd like to pass the mic to our newest national sponsor, Ivy Business School. Please join me in welcoming Sharon Irwin-Foulon, Executive Director of Career Management and Corporate Recruiting, to the stage.
Wow, look at all of you, 4 years later. Congratulations to the Lean In team. This is a big accomplishment. As I was thinking about coming in here today and announcing that Ivy was a proud sponsor of Lean In, I really was thinking about what is this about? So what a great way to wish Frank Gehry a happy birthday in the AGO, his first Canadian property, but also about fundamentally, when I think about my own career and in education, it's really fundamentally about optimism. And I think what the world needs right now is a lot of optimism. And I appreciate that about what's happening in Canada. I'm proud to be Canadian. I'm so pleased that today we're hooking on to Katie and what she has to say about being Canadian, being the power of women, and what we can do in the world. Lean In is an important organization. I've followed it for a long time, and I'm so proud about the optimism about women, our competency, and what we can do, and that you've found circles and support from one another and from those around you. I'm proud to be Canadian. I'm proud to be part of leanin.org, but I'm also proud of all of you for making the commitment to yourselves, to what you're about, to your careers, and to this country. So congratulations, and thanks again to the Lean In team for making this a reality. You've done amazing things, and keep going.
Thanks so much, Sharon, and thank you to Ivy to your continuous support of women in business. Now, if at any moment in the evening you notice that I'm taking out my phone, it's because I'll be tweeting some of the interesting things we're about to hear from our speakers, and I encourage you to join us in this if you're so inclined, with the hashtag #LeanInCanada, @LeanInCanada, and of course our speakers' handles @TelfordK and @AmberMac. This brings us to our main portion of the event for this evening. It's a great honor to have as our keynote speaker, Katie Telford, a Canadian political strategist and the current Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. She previously served as the National Campaign Co-Chair and the National Campaign Director for Trudeau on the successful 2015 election campaign. After her talk, Katie will be joined by Amber MacArthur, a best-selling author, innovation speaker, television host, and marketing entrepreneur, for a fireside chat as well as a question and answer period. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Katie Telford to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. Lean in Canada first contacted me over social media, I believe, to say, would I be interested in doing something with them? And I said, of course. I've been a fan of Lean In for quite some time as well. And to be honest, I expected sort of a Lean In circle in a boardroom somewhere. But I'm thrilled that there's this many people that have come out in support of each other, in support of Lean In Canada, and because it's very much an ethos that I like to think that I live by, and I certainly encourage the women I work with to live by as well. As Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister of Canada, it's a privileged position. It's a position that I am honored to be in. And I will say, I'm not the first woman in the role. That honor goes to the first Prime Minister of Canada who was a woman, hired a woman Chief of Staff. I am the first that was hired by a Prime Minister who was a man. And so I'm the second. I'm already the longest serving. So we've got some records to beat still. I spend a lot of my time as Chief of Staff working as a manager and of both direct reports within the Prime Minister's office, but also indirectly of what is a large organization of both political staff, but also working with public servants and with volunteers and supporters from across the country. And also those who aren't supporters, spending time understanding why they're not hearing about their issues and seeing if we can't connect with them too, because that's our job in the Prime Minister's office and for the Prime Minister that he feels very, very strongly about. So because I spend a lot of time managing people, and I also spend a lot of time going to meetings, I thought I'd focus on those two things since this was billed as a bit of a getting to know me session. I thought I would share with you through the lens of diversity and inclusion some lessons I've learned about hiring and recruitment, and some tips and observations from the many, many meetings I go to. It would be embarrassing to tell you how many times I've actually turned on the computer in my office. But I can tell you I live off my BlackBerry. Yes, a BlackBerry, for those who ask what kind of technology we have in government. I hope later, I will be sticking around after my talk for a little while. There's a networking session, and I hope you'll share your tips and observations with me. Because really, the tips and observations I picked up are mostly through feedback and experiences that we all share. There's no silver bullet on these things in my experience. And if I have time, after I talk about management and meetings, I hope to end by telling you a story about a breakfast club of superheroes that I've met in the federal government who inspired one of my most favorite days as Chief of Staff. And I saw a couple smiles when I saw superheroes, so it's not just my 5-year-old's thing. And so I really will try and get to that story. So to begin on recruiting and hiring, the challenge. I actually think that this is one of the great challenges of managers. Out of curiosity, how many people in the room right now manage even one staff person? So what I would say, if you're thinking through the lens of how do we increase our numbers, which I would challenge you is every one of our responsibilities, and by increase our numbers, I mean the number of women in any role. It is not just politics that needs more women, though I do enjoy the hashtag #AddWomenChangePolitics. It is in the boardrooms, it's at the senior management levels, it's in the public service. Too often, my director of communications, who also happens to be a woman, and I, are two of the only women in a room, in a meeting with the Prime Minister and being briefed by a mixture of public servants and political staff. Actually, the diversity in the room oftentimes comes from the cabinet that the Prime Minister appointed. We have an incredibly diverse and gender parity cabinet. But it's stark when they are the ones providing the diversity in the room. When it's only the Minister of Foreign Affairs and I, as the two women in a boardroom full of people advising us on foreign policy, we have more work to do. So we can't stop just because we got into government. We can't stop because there's a gender parity cabinet. We can't stop until we have hit that gender balance. I don't know that it's 50-50. I remember Carolyn Bennett, our Minister of Indigenous Affairs, saying this to me one time, who's done all kinds of work on increasing our numbers, and her saying it's not about exact, it's about finding that right balance, that right mixture. So how did we even get to that gender parity cabinet? We needed a plan. We were deliberate about it. I was actually at a conference in the fall, a women's summit, where there was a CEO on the panel. It was in the United States, and there was a CEO, American CEO on the panel, who said, "I want to tell you a story that I heard about the Prime Minister of Canada." And I sat in the room and I thought this should be interesting. And she said how she was at a Catalyst event. And it's true, he was at a Catalyst event. Catalyst, I would encourage you to check out that organization as well. They do incredible work at increasing diversity and inclusion in the corporate sphere in particular. And they were giving an award to the Prime Minister, and this CEO happened to be at the event. And she heard people saying to him, "Oh, it's so amazing that you have a gender parity cabinet. How did it happen?" And people talking about it as if it was almost just something he could just snap his fingers, and he did. And he made the point of telling a story that I've heard him say a number of times, and I lived the experience. So as I did to the CEO afterwards, when I went over and introduced myself to the CEO, and I said there actually was a Canadian in the room, and I actually happened to be the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, and she looked at me and she said, "So is the story that I'm telling true?" And I said, "Yes, it really is." And the story she told was how he looked at the group of CEOs at this event and said that did not come about by accident. That came about because we worked at it for a couple of years. When he first entered the leadership race, it was important to us that we went out and recruited and encouraged and cajoled different Canadians that would reflect Canada, to get involved in politics. And I can tell you, women are not the easiest recruits. And I have subsequently talked to a lot of men and women who do recruiting in other spheres than politics, and they say that they run into similar challenges, and this is why it's a tip and a thought that I hope we share no matter what part of Canada that we work in, which is that you need to ask a lot of times. You need to be persistent. You need to be stubborn. You need to know that you want that diversity and inclusion and build a plan around it. It's not just a board that declares we need to have more women and then it's magically going to happen. It's not a leader who says it's important and then all of a sudden it just appears. There has to be a team that is committed to doing it. There has to be a staff that's bought into it, that's outreaching to find those people. You have to hire an executive search firm, not so much in politics. I've learned this in other parts where I've said, "Is the search firm good at this?" And I've actually received the answer sometimes, "No." And I said, "Well, so what are we doing about that?" We have to keep asking questions and pushing in order to ensure that we recruit and hire in ways, whether it's in the boardroom or the cabinet room or in the Prime Minister's office, that reflect Canada. And my last thing on recruiting and hiring is it means sometimes you're going to have to be willing to take some heat. When we first got into government, there were some articles written, more than 30 days, maybe 30 days, maybe even 60 days, saying, what are they doing? Why haven't they hired all their staff yet? It's in disarray. And we just took it because we knew that the reason we were taking our time was to ensure that we did the best recruiting possible. We could have filled those jobs overnight. And we could have filled them with our insular network of people that all knew each other and that didn't reach out to ensure that there was regional representation, that there was as much diversity within our ranks as possible. Despite taking that time, though, I will tell you it's one of my great frustrations that we took our time and hit gender parity within the Prime Minister's office. And we've generally hit gender parity across the political staff ranks within government. But at the senior-most levels, we're barely hitting that 30%. We have work to do, and we talk about it regularly. And so on recruiting and hiring, what I would say is have a plan, be deliberate, be persistent, be willing to take some heat, knowing that when you get there, all those columnists that question gender parity cabinet, saying you must put merit first, you don't hear many of them criticizing it today. You actually didn't hear them talking like that the day after these women were appointed, because every single one of them deserved the cabinet seat that they went into. Second, I agree. Second, my job, I'm often asked, like, what is your day like? My job, I often think, is going to meetings and checking my BlackBerry, and it's obviously way more than that. As I said, it's a genuine privilege to do what I do every day, whether it's going up to Center Block and having an office next door to the Prime Minister and having that first-hand close view to everything he's doing and working on and the cabinet is doing and working on, or whether it's in Langevin Block across the street, or whether it's traveling with him. But in all of these circumstances, it's going to meetings and checking my BlackBerry. So one thing I started doing when I went to meetings, and it's something I became a bit known for during the campaign in the years prior, was I became known for liking numbers. One of the reasons I say I like numbers, besides the fact that I'm a naturally sort of evidence-based person, but I think it's actually also gender-related. It's harder to fight with me when I have a number on something. It's not subjective anymore, at least not in the same way. So a number I started tracking when we got into government, because I still track them, in our chiefs of staff meetings, we still go around sometimes, not as regularly as we once did heading into the campaign, but we still go around and talk about what our favorite numbers are, or a number that's challenging us. And the number that I track in every single meeting is how many women are in the room. And I don't do it so that I can announce it in every meeting. I do it so that, initially, actually, because I just wanted to see. I wanted to see what the trend line looked like. I wanted to see if there were different subject areas where you could see differences, where you could see more women in certain areas than in others. But then the funny thing happened where people started noticing me doing it. It's like, you know, you write in your notebook the date, the name of the meeting, and at the top of mine on each page, it says 3 men, 1 woman, or normally the numbers are much higher in one and much lower in the other. And they started watching. I've started watching more women appearing in meetings and being specifically introduced to me. And I have also watched men and women doing the same thing. And I've started seeing them tracking other numbers as well. How many visible minority or indigenous, and I can tell you we're much worse on both of those fronts. And so we have a big challenge ahead of us. So the biggest thing, though, that I started to realize, and actually it was from Sheryl Sandberg, which seemed appropriate to tell you, was I was at a summit and I was hearing her speak, and it was an all-women summit. And she came out on the stage and she looked out at the audience and she said, "Doesn't this feel strange? Being in a room full of all these, it was all kind of executive level women." And I sat back and I thought, it really does. Because how often are you in a room with mostly women? And by the way, thank you to the men that are in the room. Some of them I know came to heckle me because I recognized quite a few of them. But I also appreciate the fact that they do that because they're here to support the rest of us. So thank you. So what I realized then was the importance of tracking those numbers in the meetings was that when you don't, it's so easy for it to seem and become normal. The normal thing is for it to just be me and my director of communications and one of the 15 ministers who are women, and the rest of the room to be men. But when you're writing it down and making a point, making a note of it to yourself, you look at what that percentage is when it's 12 and 3, or sometimes worse, it's not normal, and it sticks out. So that's the biggest reason I would say keep doing it. And a few other quick things about meetings. I do this less rigorously than I mean to, but do you always make sure that everyone in the room is introduced? You do not have to be the chair of the meeting to make sure that happens. If there is room at the table, do you invite the note takers or the more junior staff, often women, who are sitting around the sides of the table, do you invite them to the table? Because if there's an empty chair there, why not let them sit there so that they can actually see the lips moving on both sides of the table? Do you make sure that everyone, and it's not always appropriate, but that everyone gets a chance to speak, including the note takers and the more junior staff, if you're able to? Because the amount that I learn from our younger staff, I can tell you, I don't know how to do all the social media things that you need to do now. The people in our office that do are well over a decade younger than me, and maybe more, and not just social media. There's a lens through which they look at life that we need to be hearing about, especially in government and in public service. How can we talk about skills and jobs of the future when we don't have 20-year-olds sitting in the room? Or rather, they're sitting in the room and they're not being asked what they think. So these are just some of the things that I'm both trying to get more rigorous about and I wanted to share with you. So let me quickly tell you about the Breakfast of Superheroes. They're a group of women who when you're in opposition, you don't deal with the armed forces in the same way. You read about it, but you're not, when you get into government, and especially into the Prime Minister's office and certain of the international offices, you spend a fair bit of time thinking about foreign policy. It becomes a real balancing act, actually, trying to make sure that you're staying connected to Canadians at home, while at the same time having all these new, awesome, in all senses of that word, responsibilities as it relates to the rest of the world and Canada's role in it. And so it just so happened that a now major general, she was then a brigadier general, things that I'm still learning are all the various titles, she said to me one day after a meeting, "Would you be interested in coming to breakfast with some of the women in the senior ranks of the armed forces and hearing a little bit about her experience?" And what was so cool about that invitation, I thought, is if I weren't a woman chief of staff, I wonder if the invitation would have got made. So I got this window because of who I was, and it's why it's so important to have diversity in these different roles. So I said yes, even though I'm not a morning person, as those of you who know me can attest. My husband and son certainly can. But I got up super early to go to this breakfast, and I was blown away. I wonder how many of you know that there are 9 generals at the general officer level who are women. And to tell you 3 of them who I've gotten to know, or 2 of them who I've gotten to know, and then I'll tell you about a third that they adopted into their ranks. One is Major General Tammy Harris. She's who invited me to the breakfast. She's now the Deputy Commander of the Air Force. She's had so many firsts in her career, I can't even tell you them all, but including being the first woman to command a major Canadian Armed Forces base. She's a first in her current role as well. But the best thing, in my experience, about Major General Tammy Harris was how she opens up and encourages others to learn her story and brings them in, and not only brings in, when she realized my interest and how I was taking it back to the office, and I was following up with her over email about different stories I'd heard, she said, well, would you like it if I tried pulling together some women from the RCMP or from police or from various other places that she pointed to? And I said, I'd love that. So needless to say, she started expanding the circle. And these women started learning from each other, and I started learning a ton. And Lieutenant General Christine Whitecross, Chris, but if I said Chris, you might not know she was the woman, and I'm sure she's used that trick before. She is now in command, she's Canadian, who's now in command of the NATO Defense College. She's the third Canadian to be in command, the first woman. She came to one of those breakfasts. She came to a couple of them, actually. And at one of them that I happened to be at, she looked at me. It was the first time she'd met me. I don't often feel intimidated. In that moment, I did. She looked me directly in the eyes and said, if you and the Prime Minister mean what you say, you are going to need to take draconian measures. And I thought, oh my goodness, what do we have to do? And I walked away from the breakfast thinking about this over and over. And I realized what she meant, or at least what I interpreted it to be. Maybe one day someone will tell her I said this and she'll tell me I was wrong, but what I have taken away from it is her very direct words to me meant, you and the Prime Minister, you need to be fearless. I don't get to be the woman in the room who's afraid to be the woman in the room, who wants to fit in and be one of in the room. I have to be the woman in the room who says, where are the other women in the room? How do we get them here? The Prime Minister has to, and he does, call out boardrooms, larger rooms, smaller rooms, and he'll sometimes do it with a smile, as we did just last week, when he looked around a room and said, whoa, so we have a ways to go until there's gender parity in this room, eh? We have to do more than that, obviously, but we do that. We have to be fearless. We have to take that heat I described earlier, because the results are worth it. And so, to conclude, I just want to say to all of you who are obviously already thinking in the vein of lean in, make sure and take your seat at the table. Take note of the numbers. If you're managers, take your time and plan to recruit right. The cabinet, the thing I am most privileged to be able to do, is not just meet the superheroes, and the reason I call them the superheroes is look up any of those names I mentioned. Actually, the one I didn't mention, First Commissioner of the Coast Guard, who is a woman, is Jodie Thomas, and she's also part of that breakfast club. And do you know the Canadian security establishment, actually, while I'm on a roll, is headed up by a woman? That's like the whole cyber, super cool part of, spy world. It's a woman in charge of that. We need to tell those stories and share those stories. Because I know, as a little girl, I didn't know about the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister. I got my picture taken in the Prime Minister's seat when I went to Ottawa one day. I didn't know about the Chief of Staff's office. And I'm not saying everyone should. But I do want more people to, so that we can have different people taking on these jobs, bringing different perspectives to these jobs. I want more people, more women, to know about the roles they can play in the armed forces, in the private sector, in the public sector, so that we see different perspectives coming to these roles. And one last thought that comes from my 5-year-old, who I've turned those women into superheroes, and they have become bedtime stories. And that's part of the superhero theme there, is during the election, he turned to my husband, and he asked him if he was allowed, if my husband was allowed, if daddies, he actually said, if daddies could vote. And my husband's quite politically active, as some of you may know, and looked at him and said, well, yes. Why do you ask, George? And George said, well, because mummies run elections. And my husband tweeted this, actually, and it became quite a thing. But it lives on in me, not only because it was a cute story, but because in one election, for the first time in Canadian history, all 3 political parties had a woman as campaign director. And so in that one election, a new paradigm was born. Because that's all my son needed to think, that women, mummies, run elections. So I challenge you to learn about a new story or adventure by a woman and share that story. And maybe it's your own. Be fearless about that if it's yours. Let it not be normal for you to be one of the few women in the room. And until we're equal, then it's okay to be normal, until we're balanced. And until we do find that balance, that right mix, let's remember that this room is very special. So thank you to Lean In Canada for doing events like this, because we've got a long ways to go, but these growing numbers of people being interested in events like this, and I say people, both men and women, are going to help us get there. So thank you very much.
So you can feel free to take a seat here. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you so much, Katie. It's been a delight to hear not only how you were stubborn and deliberate in how to plan for achieving diversity in your cabinet, but I also really liked how you mentioned the men in the room. Like you, I'm a big fan of numbers, so when I counted up in the attendee list, I noticed that we have 4% men in the room. And I do want to be deliberate and stubborn about increasing that percentage, because I really do think that it takes all of us to achieve parity. So thank you for that. Now, as we begin our chat with Katie and Amber, I'd like to mention that since it's a rare opportunity to be able to ask Katie some questions in person, let's make sure we'll keep our questions brief and concise so that as many people as possible are able to participate. Over to you.
I think we should move our chairs up a little bit, just so everyone can see. So start with that. There we go. How's that? Better? Great. Thank you. First of all, I have to say I loved your story about talking about superhero women with your son. I have an 8-year-old boy, and I just finished reading a book about Rosa Parks to him at bedtime, and it's amazing to me just how little kids are able to absorb so much information and just change the narrative, really, for the next generation. So thanks for sharing that. We are going to be doing this in an interactive way, so if you have questions, by all means, please think of your questions, and we'll break throughout this to be able to take some time to answer them. So the first question I have for you, because I was researching you online, don't be worried, I didn't dig up anything bad. In fact, I would say exactly the opposite. I think many people in the room are probably familiar in terms of what you've done over the past few years, but I was curious if you could talk to us a little bit about your journey from the time you went to university till now, and just your path to get to where you are today.
So one of my bridesmaids and friends from high school is here, who I haven't seen in a while, and she and her husband know much more of this story than I am going to tell you. The key, I think, to the path that got me to where I am today was saying yes and introducing myself at a number of different opportunities. And so literally coming out of university, I called up someone. I moved back to Toronto. This is my hometown. And I called someone up and said, I wouldn't mind getting involved in partisan politics. I had not been involved in partisan politics before, and giving it a shot. How should I get involved? And they said, go volunteer on a by-election. There's one about to come up. That's a great way to get involved in politics, because on by-elections, everyone gets involved, not just from that community, but beyond. So you get to meet everyone in a party. So if you know what party you want to get involved in, which he was making the correct assumption, then go out to Beaches East York. That was my first by-election that I volunteered on full-time. And so I did. And as politicians started arriving to volunteer, and there was some butterfly moments. I was young, but I think, we all still have these. And I walked up to them and just started introducing myself until I found a job. And then from there on in, different opportunities, different openings, different promotions, you just keep saying yes. Don't think you're not ready yet. Just go for it. And that's been really the key and the path.
I think that's an interesting comment, because I think as women, very often we hear advice that tells us that we need to learn how to say no, in fact. And we're taught that, oh, you're doing too much. It's time that you have to say no to this or say no to that. So it is kind of the opposite, perhaps, of what some women have heard along the way.
I do that sometimes.
I love it. And in terms of the people who have inspired you, I think one of the things that I always like to hear about, and I'm sure the same for the men and women in the room, is who has inspired you? You mentioned and talked a little bit about this next generation growing up and how we can ensure they do have those role models. Who did you look up to?
In terms of women, who did I look up to?
Doesn't matter,
Or just
either
generally?
one.
I didn't have one specific person. I'd say there was a mixture of people, and they've definitely changed over time. But I did take note of the firsts in terms of women, whether it was the first prime minister who was a woman, whether it was first ministers in various places, first premiers who were women, but not just politicians. Just generally, that's always been an area of interest. First, seconds. Seconds are good too, I hear. And but actually the first politician to get me into politics was Bob Rae. And I grew up around the corner from him, and he said, he said, whatever the party. Because actually the party I ended up joining was not the party he was part of at that time. But he said, whatever the party. And my neighbors were actually staunch conservatives. That's actually how I figured out I became a liberal, was that I had conservatives on one side and NDP on the other. But both of them, and I think this is such an important thing, both of them said, just get involved. And they really were role models to me in terms of making that push. And it's what I try to do with young people as much as I can now. While I wish for them all to become liberal, it's not about that. It's actually about getting involved and increasing those voter numbers of young people, which we did see in the last election, but we still have a long way to go.
We were talking a little bit backstage in the green room about the momentum that we're seeing right now in Canada in terms of women who are running their own businesses, women who are really breaking the mold as far as what we've seen historically. How optimistic are you that we will be able to continue to forge forward and see even more opportunities in this world?
I'm very optimistic. Partly because the people I work with as a team, the broader team, are all so committed to seeing more opportunities and to seeing success, but also because of what I've had the opportunity to see around the world. When I've been traveling with the Prime Minister, we actually met with, I was saying backstage that we actually met with a lean-in group in China. And we try, wherever we travel, actually, to meet with groups of CEOs or entrepreneurs who happen to be women. We've done it in New York, you may have noticed at the White House recently, and in a number of other countries around the world, as well as across Canada. And every time we have one of those sessions, we walk away learning something and being inspired by any number, if not all, of the women in the room. So I think that says there's huge opportunity there, but we have to keep talking about it and promoting it and creating those platforms for women to see other women. It's sort of that see her to be her mentality. And I think that because there's an increasing number of women, there's an increasing opportunity for more women to see those women and to see those opportunities.
Let's talk for a little bit about that recent roundtable in Washington, D.C. Between Canada and the U.S.
Yeah.
You asked for that. I didn't really have it on my list, but Nonetheless, no, I'm curious because I'm sure every woman in the room saw that. I think many women in the room were excited and inspired about that meeting taking place. What are the next steps? What comes out of that?
So to be totally honest, we're figuring that out. I was actually saying to some folks just before the talk on the floor here that one thing I've been overwhelmed by in a really positive, optimistic way was the number of emails I received directly from people I hadn't met before, let alone what came into the Prime Minister's office and what the CEOs who were with us have received from other business people right across the country who are reaching out, both men and women, saying, how can we help? And they're wanting to get involved for a number of different reasons I have found based on reading their emails to this point. And to be honest, we're madly trying to figure out how to now support what is an even bigger thing as it turned out to what it was even conceived as. Because I think there's an even bigger opportunity there, frankly, than we'd originally thought, based on the feedback we've received so far. Some want to get involved because they see it as an opportunity to grow Canadian businesses. Some want to get involved because they see it as an opportunity to specifically grow women-led businesses and to support women entrepreneurs. Others want to see it succeed because it can help us in communicating with the United States as we go through an interesting time in the next period of time when it comes to talking about trade, when it comes to talking about the unique relationship between Canada and the United States and Mexico and NAFTA. Who do we want helping to communicate that but some of our best CEOs? And, you know, for me, it's also a walking the talk. A lot of women, and men actually, there's a lot of research out there that says women bring special skills to the table, unique skills to the table, when it comes to negotiating and mediation and diplomacy. So who would we rather than have at the table is at least some of those women CEOs with that unique skill set, talking with our American counterparts. And so I think there's so many opportunities with it that we're still sorting it out, to be honest, but there's a lot of activity already, and I think it's pretty exciting.
So just to pick up on that a little bit, and speaking of women entrepreneurs, I saw a tweet that you had sent to Arlene Dickinson, who wrote an article in Maclean's about the roundtable, and you said something in your tweet to her. You said, the more attention we draw, the less likely the recommendations sit on the shelf. And I thought that was interesting, and I'm just curious, for the people in this room, can you talk a little bit about how we can all draw attention as women and as men to really what is, I would say, a movement?
So let me start by saying I'm a huge fan of Arlene, which is why I engaged on that, because I was curious almost if we could find common ground on this. She was, for those who didn't read what she wrote, she was expressing concern, I think it's fair to say, that the council was one more roundtable. It was one more talk fest, and that really leaders by now should know what to do to support women entrepreneurs, and so just do it. And she'd actually been on an expert panel where she, only a couple of years ago for the federal government, our predecessors, that she'd been involved in and had made recommendations and was saying, it's all there. And first off, I wanted to explain to her how I viewed the council not as some expensive venture and how there were all these other benefits that I was just mentioning. But secondly, and actually I haven't had a chance to tell her this, is because of that exchange, I emailed off to my policy staff and said, can somebody go find this expert panel report so that we can actually read it and figure out, you know, how it does fit into things, which actually exactly fit, as it turned out, with my tweet, where what I was trying to say to her was, I think we have to keep talking about things. I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. It's not a question of just doing it, because if we're not at the same time supporting it through our words and through our conversations, then we could just do something that falls flat on its face. So I feel like these things have to be connected, our talking and our actions, and bringing attention to things. We also can't just do things if we don't have the support of the public. And the very fact that I had to go looking for a report that she mentioned, I'm embarrassed to say, I mean, it triggered for me as soon as she said it, but I hadn't seen it recently. The very fact that she had to trigger that with me, well, it would suggest to me that we still have a lot of work to do with the general public in terms of knowing what those answers are.
So just thinking of Arlene and other female entrepreneurs, I'm guessing you have seen kind of the best in this country. And I'm curious, as you see women who are growing businesses today, are there some challenges that you are seeing that maybe even women in the room have that are things that are just becoming common but that can be overcome? Are there some common themes that you're seeing there?
There are a lot of common themes. And it's interesting, one of the things I find difficult is often the question of, are the common themes, for example, with women entrepreneurs or with entrepreneurs? How many of the themes are unique and solely unique to women versus, a broader diversity and inclusion lens, or frankly, to all entrepreneurs? And, how do you weight the resources and the time and attention to each of those things so that you get it right? Having said that, as Arlene said, there are some very common things like we hear all the time that women have more difficulty getting access to, sometimes because, well, for a variety of reasons. There's experts in this room, actually, I know, who can speak to this better than I can, but they have greater challenges getting access to markets outside of Canada. They have challenges getting access to capital. In a way that we just don't see the same in terms of the numbers with male entrepreneurs. So there are definitely common threads that I know if we all pull out Arlene Dickinson's report. And I'm dead serious on that. This information is out there, but it needs to be pulled to the front. It needs to be talked about more. The public support has to be gained for it, while at the same time, she's 100% right. We just need to start doing it.
I think it's interesting, you come into a room like this, it's very comfortable. Like you said, I work in tech, so you can imagine I'm not often in rooms that are full of women. It's the exact opposite. So you come into rooms where it's comfortable like this, but then we all leave and we kind of go off on our own little journeys. And we've all run into issues in different work environments where we've encountered some of these challenges. And I'm just curious to you, what does an organization like Lean In Canada, you talked a little bit about it, but I'd like you to expand on it. How important is it that we all meet like this and we support each other and we network?
So I think it's very important, and actually in our office we don't do it enough. Actually, when I come to events like this, it always triggers for me to schedule the next one, where the women in the Prime Minister's office and the PMO will get together over lunch once in a while and just have a round table on what we're experiencing. And I can tell you, in the last session like that we did, the thing that sort of hit me was the number of young women that were actually feeling their age more than their gender. And the two things may or may not have been had a compounding effect for them, but we spent a lot of time talking about age. And the number of thank you notes I get after, in terms of just having had the space to have those conversations, suggests to me that it's a pretty important thing. I remember when I first became a chief of staff to a minister at Queen's Park, being invited to join a club. I'm not sure it would be named this anymore, but that was called the Power Chicks. And back then it was our powerful title, and I don't know if we'd get away with it now. But I can tell you it was so great being welcomed into that relatively small group of women, just to have people to talk to who would give you those tips, that were mentors. And when I first became chief of staff to the Prime Minister, I received a pen, and engraved on it was Power Chick from that group of women. So I think those bonds you make with women who go through similar things, especially because there are fewer of them, is really important. It's really important to share those experiences.
Now, I know one question that women get asked all the time. It's a question that, quite frankly, I don't want to ask you, but I feel as though I have to go there. Because
Good.
On the Lean In Canada Facebook page, there was a poll done that asked, what should we ask Katie? At the top of the list was this question about balance and work-life balance that we hear everywhere, and it is an issue. Of course, as a woman, I'm sure you don't like being asked this, but maybe we can kind of reframe it in a different way. How do you manage the demands of having such an important and influential job, being a mother, being a wife? You know, what do you look to, or who do you look to as far as your guidance to help you do all of this?
So, first off, I don't mind being asked. And I realize that's a bit different. We were talking earlier about how there's often a bit of a social media backlash when women get asked about their work-life balance, because the question always arises is, why don't you ask men? But to me, the answer to that isn't necessarily not asking women so that we stop sharing those best practices and sharing those tips. It's actually start asking the men too. Because I can tell you my husband has all kinds of tips that you are probably better hearing sometimes. And let alone the many, many other men that are in this room. And so I think we actually should be talking about it. It is part of how we succeed in business, in life, in work, is being able to be successful at home. If you're coming home and you know you've got an unhappy home life, or your child is struggling and you can't make these things work, that's going to affect how you are at work. So I actually am a believer that we shouldn't be kind of burying that side of us when we're at work. That is a part of us. Having said that, I was a little worried, as I mentioned to you earlier, because I did check that poll on, it was on Twitter too, and I saw it growing, up to 50% people wanted me to talk about work-life balance, and I thought, well, there's no silver bullet on this, and actually, I think, but I will say two things. One, and I know a lot of women leaders have said this out there, but choose to the extent that you choose, because you do choose. Choose your partner wisely. I have a really good one, and it makes a world of difference when you have that support at home. And actually, three things. Two, keep a circle of friends that you stay connected to. I have a girls' weekend coming up that my supportive husband, this connects the two things actually, my supportive husband thankfully does not question me going on despite the fact that I travel so regularly, because it's one time a year and it keeps you grounded, and your girlfriends can be pretty darn important. And then three, and this is advice from someone else that I've latched onto, is forget this whole balance idea. Someone said, I've heard it said a number of times actually, is find the right mix, and it's going to be different times at different points in your life. You're not going to have the same job your whole life. So sometimes your job is going to take precedence, and other times your child is, and your husband is, and your family is, or your partner is, or your dating life is, whatever the case may be. You go through different phases in your life. Just make sure not to disconnect one from the other entirely. It's finding the right mix.
I feel like that answer deserves a big round of applause. I've heard that question asked a lot, but I've never heard it answered as well as you just did, so thank you for that. Oh, thank you. Good timing. Okay, so we do have some questions that were submitted online from people who are in the room. I'm going to get to those first, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. These are a wide range of questions, so we may be all over the map here, but we picked a few that we thought were interesting. The first one is from Heather Evans, who asks, have you ever experienced imposter syndrome, and how have you managed to overcome it, assuming you've experienced it?
So, to be honest, I hadn't thought about this much until my director of communications, the wonderful Kate Purchase, spoke at an event actually for me and did an incredible job. I actually emailed her and said, if you weren't on holiday, I would just ask you to go and step in for me again. She's awesome. And actually, in her talk, when I read her speech, she talked about imposter syndrome, and it caused me to think a lot about it. And I kind of question, there's obviously always exceptions to every generalization like this or rule, but I think we all do at some point.
I mean, who's kidding who? When I walked into the White House the first time for a state dinner in my fancy dress and everything else, there are moments you say, how did I get here? Even though you full well know how you got there. Having said it, it's reminding yourself of that second half of that sentence, and I think that's the answer to the question, is knowing how you got where you got. Staying grounded in that. And I think that's hugely important. It's very easy to question why you are somewhere, especially when you're one of not many. When you look around the room and you feel either younger or more female, or whatever the case may be, it's easy to think, I'm not necessarily supposed to be here, but you just got to get over that fast. We don't have the luxury to, and not that it's a luxury, it's a genuine feeling, but we don't have the time, especially in my line of work. We're on a clock. So we just have to remind ourselves how we got where we got and keep at it, keep pushing.
The BlackBerry's going off.
It's on mute at the moment. I can only imagine. It's just there.
Don't worry about
Never
it.
far
You're
away.
free from it for a little while yet. Okay, we have another question from Daisy. Daisy says, I'm a newcomer who lived in Canada for the past year and a half. I really want to work in the nonprofit sector since I'm very passionate about it, and I used to work for several nonprofits. However, it's not easy for us who are new to Canada and want to contribute to Canadian society to find a career mentor or to build real connections. Do you have any advice for me?
So, two quick thoughts. That's interesting. One is, coming to things like this, first off, and then ask a whole lot of people. Going back to that be fearless. You don't just need that perfect one career mentor. I'm not sure there is such a thing. It's actually, you're going to need, there's some people who believe you need a board. I have friends who have that. Other people have loose networks that they invoke once in a while, sometimes as a group, sometimes as one-offs. I don't think there's one way to find or to have a mentor even, but you do need to ask. You have to ask someone for them to do it. It's not just, it's rare that I've heard of someone walking up and saying, I would like to be your mentor. It's my experience anyways.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to get to some audience questions in just a couple more questions that we had that were submitted online. This is an interesting one from Amitha. Amitha says, how do you navigate the expectations to act like a lady in politics? She says she's finding the same issues in her industry, which is health-related. And she says, in other words, being too ambitious, hustling too much, versus my male colleagues when it seems okay if they do it.
There's a lot in that question. So first, let me pause on the word lady for a moment. I don't know if there's actually any media in the room anymore, but, well, there's you. But
I'm not real media, just on the internet, that's it.
But something that has bothered me for many years now, so I'm finally getting the chance to address it, is there was an event, actually it was during the leadership bid for Justin Trudeau. So long before we called him Prime Minister, and we didn't even call him leader at that point. He was just Justin, actually. We wouldn't think of calling him that now. And there was a group of women, most of whom had not been involved in politics before, and they were going to throw an event for him, a fundraiser, and we're going to particularly focus on attracting other women to come to this event who weren't particularly politically inclined up until that point. And they did an invitation where they used the word ladies in it. And the media and our opponents did not like it one bit. And to the point that, some felt that there should be apologies made, and we were dodging these questions for some time, and could we keep having this event even, because it became that controversial. I don't think we should run away from being ladies. I actually look back and regret a little bit that I didn't speak up at that time. Because one of the women did. They wrote an op-ed piece, and and she's a good friend of mine, and I was super proud of her because she was not a politically engaged person in the way that I was. And she wrote a great op-ed about it afterwards. But everyone skirted, even in that debate, whether or not it was appropriate for us to say ladies. And I don't know, to me it's kind of like a pantsuit thing, where I encourage you to wear pantsuits, and I also happen to wear dresses more often than not. And I almost think we have to move past that debate. Be ambitious, be bold, be fearless, be unafraid to be the woman in the room who talks about women, as I said earlier. You know, to me, I'm hoping we are getting to a bit of a tipping point where women can feel that they can be whoever they want to be in the room. And now, having said that, one quick story was I came back from that same women's conference I was mentioning earlier, and one of the speakers talked about how, as women, we don't take as much room, generally speaking, in a chair as most men do. And so we take up less space in a room. And so there was actually a discussion around how that can affect how we're perceived in a room. And so I came back, and when I had one of those PMO sessions with the women, I said, so just so you know, here's a few ways to try and experiment sitting in a room that may or may not help you. And I didn't know how I felt about all of this, especially given my usual ethos that I just said of be whoever. But this wasn't changing who you are. It was just trying to sit a little differently, I thought. Needless to say, over the next few weeks, I watched women, including myself, sitting differently in our seats. And we came back to each other, and a few of us were kind of like, yeah, you know, that whole, you know, you take up more space on the chair and you sit like this. You totally are empowering yourself when you do that. I don't know what it is. So needless to say, I am not saying be who you are and never experiment and try things differently to own a room. But I don't think we should be afraid to be feminine whatsoever.
All right, we're going to do one more question that was submitted online, and then we'll get to the people in the room to ask questions. And this is a simple one. And this question is from Shingle, who says, what's a good book that you've read recently?
I'm going to admit it. I knew this question was coming.
That's the only one, because we did a Facebook Live and this came up. You can watch that online.
And I couldn't remember, and so I was ridiculous on Facebook Live trying to describe this book. So I've said I'm going to go on Facebook and post later, so feel free, anybody else can go on and post for me onto the Facebook Live feed on Lean In Canada. So the book, it's actually one that the Minister of Finance, Bill Morneau, gave me just to prove the point that I talk about this stuff all the time, that he gave me for the holidays, and he's been reading as well. It's called What Works, Not Why. The longer title is What Works, Gender Equality by Design. And it's by Professor Iris, and actually I'm betting that there's someone in the room who I was talking to earlier from U of T, will know if I'm pronouncing this right or not, but Iris Bohnet, B-O-H-N-E-T. So just so you know, to prove my point on having the right supportive husband, after the ridiculous Facebook Live moment, I quickly BBM'd my husband and said, can you run upstairs next to the bed, find the book I'm reading, and send me the title, please. So that's the one I'm reading, and I genuinely am reading that at the moment, and it actually backs up one of the theses I tried to propose today, which is this stuff doesn't happen by accident, it happens by design. And this particular professor gets into describing a number of different ways you can go about it that I'm finding quite fascinating, and I encourage you to check it out.
All right, thank you. So we are going to open it up to questions from the audience. I just want to say one quick thing before. No, it's okay, you can keep your hand up. But we're not going to use a microphone, so you'll have to stand up and ask your question when we call upon you. And if you can, so we can get in as many questions as possible, please keep it to one question, not a two-part, but a short little question. And that way we can get to as many people as possible. Oh, you do have a microphone. Okay, great. So one-part questions are ideal. We're going to start with this woman right here because she was the quickest to raise her hand, so you get to go first. And maybe if you don't mind just kind of including a bit of that question, and I don't know if everybody could hear that. You couldn't hear it? So we'll try to use the microphone next time if we get a chance, if it's working.
So how do we make sure that we continue on the path we're on? That's how I'm going to describe your question. And in terms of the cabinet and gender parity, through public support, and we have work to do on the political side. I would encourage you all to get engaged on that. It's the kind of thing Lean in Canada and others can do. And because by political support and by public support, I don't mean partisan support. I mean support for that being something that whoever the party is that's running, we should want them all to commit to achieving similar things. We should want all political parties having a diversity of voices within them. And so I think it's really by actually things like this. It's by social media audiences growing and pushing. And I know there's a lot of challenges on social media in terms of some of the stuff that you get back that's not always positive. But the way to turn that around is A, the block button, and B, is actually by growing the positive audience. And actually right now the positive audience isn't big enough. So I would encourage everyone to get actually more engaged in those social media debates, the reasonable ones, because we need more positive voices speaking out.
Great. Let's go over here, and then we'll. Is the microphone working? Okay. Oh, you have one right there.
Hi. Okay. So not particularly about women. I'm an immigrant. I'm an Indian at that. So my question is, do you follow Indian politics at all? Do you have any idea? And do you think you can turn India around if you were in India?
It's a little bit hard to. Sorry, we don't have a speaker up here, so it's a little hard. Could you just repeat that one more time for us?
So my question was, do you know anything about Indian politics at all? And if you had a chance to change Indian politics for the better, do you think you could?
Do I think we could change Indian politics for the better?
Yes.
So I think and I don't mean to sound, so first off, to the first part of your question, do I know anything about Indian politics? Yes. I would not claim to be an expert whatsoever. We have foreign policy advisors and all kinds of others, but they certainly do brief us. It's a pretty big country, need to know about it. I have hope for most places in the world. And I'm sincere when I say that. I've seen some pretty incredible movements already growing in India. Actually, there are some great women business leaders there as well. And there's work to do in a lot of parts of the world, but I don't see any reason to not have hope. I know that's a high-level answer, but it was a high-level question, so I'm going to go with that.
Great. Let's go right here, and then we'll get to some further back in the room. Yep.
Thanks, Katie, for being so candid with us. So I know you mentioned that you first became a chief of staff at Queen's Park, and I just did a quick Google search and saw that you were 26 when that happened, which is crazy and should happen more often. I know there are a lot of young women in this room as well, and something I struggle with personally in working in a male-dominated industry is how might I communicate more effectively with those who are more senior than me, who I suspect who might not take me seriously because of my gender or age. So if I might, blatantly ask you for advice on how might young women or women in general gain more gravitas in interacting with others. Thank you.
So, the question is, how would you deal in an industry if you were not necessarily being discriminated against, but based on your age and your gender, maybe they weren't taking you as seriously as they should? How do you deal with that?
Questioning my hearing at the moment. I don't know if that's age. So not knowing the specifics, but in talking to, as I said, talking to the young women in our office who were talking about age as being one of the challenges they felt they were facing,
And I think they were facing, not just felt they were facing, they were facing. And I think it's something actually political staff deal with a fair bit. I'm on the upper end of the political staffer age spectrum now. I wasn't then. So there's a lot of young political staff who need to deal with people that are older than them. And I think, like with many things, the key is confidence. The key is easier said than done, I know. But the key is confidence. The key is taking that seat at the table, not allowing yourself to be put into sort of that stereotype of an assistant role, but to be a participant. It's finding the right people to talk about it in your workplace too, so that you can create a bit of a support network. And I think it's different in every circumstance. It depends on how blatant the discrimination might be or the challenges might be. Obviously, if they're serious, then you should be talking to your employer, or you should talk to your human resources department every time. But you should also, again, it's seeking out that network of peers. It's also seeking out mentors, and it's talking to friends who will, often say to me, going back to that imposter question of when I admittedly said to someone the other day, so this event is sold out. It is not a lean-in circle. It is 200 and something people. What am I going to? And they just, my friends are good in the sense that they tell me pretty much to shut up and go, Katie. You're the chief of staff to the prime minister, own it, right? And I think you've got to do that in whatever the role it is that you're in. And you've got to do it from the very beginning, and you'll quickly find yourself in a new and bigger and greater role the more you just keep owning it.
Maybe we can go back to the back of the room. And Katie, it's not your hearing. The acoustics, it kind of stops right here. It's like a wall. So if whoever takes the next question, can we go in the middle here? Yeah, right there. And if you don't mind just speaking really close to the microphone, that would be helpful.
Thank you for coming, Katie. I'm in healthcare, so I'm aware that some younger adults, when they have children, they are not able to spend the time to raise their children, so they try to bring the elderly parents from their original migrant country. And the elderly parents, that could usually, take a toll on the healthcare system. Is there anything that government is doing, maybe more precisely in Ontario, the federal is trying to help out with the childcare for the younger parents? That's my question.
So just to confirm that I'm hearing the question right, is there anything we're doing in terms of childcare? Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So yes, we did have commitments on childcare, and Minister Duclos, who's our Minister of Families and Social Development, is doing some excellent work that I would encourage you to check out and stay tuned on. But for starters, a huge commitment we made was the Canadian Child Tax Benefit that was implemented actually very soon after we got into government. And that is making sure that parents are getting and the right parents, so not the top 1%, but all the other parents that need it are getting additional resources in their pocket. They're getting extra money in their pocket to help take care of childcare. But there's more coming as well, so stay tuned.
Let's go back to this side of the room just so we're fair and going back and forth. I think in the very back there's a couple of women. We can take one of your questions. And I'm sorry, guys, I'm just kind of picking out of the room, but we'll try to get to as many as possible.
Hello. Oh, jeez. Sorry.
I heard that.
Yes, I'm glad. So since the election in the United States, there's been a significant level of civic engagement. There have been a lot of people organizing phone call campaigns to call their representatives to talk about the ACA. There have been all kinds of rallies and whatnot. In terms of Canadian politics, I'd like to know how effective those kind of campaigns actually are for us. Should we be on the phone to our MPs? Should we be tweeting our MPs? Should we be, calling the PMO when we have things that we want to affect? And does that actually make a change at the policy level?
So the short answer is yes. But just to give you a quick story of something recent that we tweeted and Facebooked about, or actually the recipient did. The Prime Minister actually does see not all the correspondence. He just can't possibly. But he does see a selection of correspondence that the correspondence unit tries to show him a selection of what's coming in on various issues on a very regular basis. As do I, as do other senior staff. And I can tell you in the last couple of months, the correspondence has skyrocketed. And so to the point that we don't have the capacity to read the correspondence, or at least so we thought. So we debated it as a team as to what in the world are we going to do? Because we can't not know what's coming in. Correspondence is one of the most valuable, free, except for the staff who have to read it. I mean, there's a cost there, but the free methods of research almost to understand what Canadians are thinking and feeling. Somebody who's taking that time to read, to write a letter. A huge number of kids, by the way, and young people write handwritten letters. It's really surprised me, and not just because their teachers tell them to, though there's a lot of teachers who do clearly tell their kids, like where they do it as a class project and you get 30 letters, and they're fun too. But a huge number of kids, surprisingly to me, write in with all kinds of thoughts from right across the country. And then their parents will add on interesting little notes to the letter with their own add-on that they would like addressed. But what we did was, it went up so much and we thought, what are we going to do? And we're sitting around saying, well, we just don't have the capacity. The public service didn't have the capacity to read this either. And so we said, well, let's put a call out to staff from ministers' offices, from Hill offices and Parliament Hill. Let's just put a call out and see if folks would come in after hours and read the correspondence so that we can, at least know what's coming in, even if they can tick some boxes and say it's coming in on these issues, positive versus negative, making these kinds of asks and pulling ones that have very, specific things that need followed up on so that nothing's totally falling through the cracks, in theory. That was the theory. Next thing I know, somebody's going to tell me that something fell through the cracks, so I'm putting a caveat. But it was the coolest thing. Like, staff from across government came out, filled our boardrooms for nights on end so that we could catch up on this backlog of mail. And then a report went from the collective staff and the head of the correspondence unit to the Prime Minister and the senior team to say, here's what this influx of mail was saying. And so then the Prime Minister got on the phone and started calling some of the ones back that had been tagged by staff. And not just positive glowing ones, ones where people had serious concerns, and he had quite lengthy phone calls with some of them, so we're only going to be able to do this so often, but no. He really wants to do it again. And some people started Facebooking about going, I just got a call from the Prime Minister. So needless to say, I can't guarantee you a call back from the Prime Minister if you write a letter, but I can tell you we read it, we pay attention, we treat it as a way of knowing what's going on in this country. So yes, emails, correspondence in terms of hard copy letters. There are people who actually still send faxes, to my surprise as well. And there are countries, we don't get this in Canada so much, but there are countries that still send telegrams. I have no idea where they go in government, but I get copies of them. Just had to put that out there.
We have a question right here from Lisa. You don't have a microphone, but we'll get you one. We can play a little game here of pass the mic. There you go.
First of all, thank you, Katie. Thank you for serving our country. We appreciate it, or I appreciate it anyway.
Thank you.
My question often to people is, when you got into the job, actually into the Prime Minister's office, what things, or one or two things, were as you didn't expect? What were the things that you went, I didn't think that's the way it operated? Or what was the thing that sort of surprised you? You went home to your husband and said, oh my God, I can't believe this.
So many things just ran through my mind. We can chat more later for anyone who wants to hear more than the first two things that popped through my mind. The first one, which is so superficial, but because you said, you went home and told your husband, it's still the Mulroney-era carpets. Apparently, or at least so the lore goes, and it's a challenge in public life and in government is renovations. You may notice get headlines when people do them, putting in new carpets, doing things like that, painting walls, like all of that. And so governments hesitate to do them a lot of the time. So needless to say, the place hasn't changed in a very long time, I'm told. And part of the way we learned that actually is we've been inviting stakeholders and all kinds of different people into the building that I had actually never gone in. I'd never been inside Langevin Block. I'd been inside the Prime Minister's office in Centre Block as a staffer in opposition for some meetings, but I'd never been in Langevin. And when stakeholders come in, it's always interesting because they may have been there under our predecessors and sometimes going way back, and so they always have a story about whose office you're in. It's pretty cool because the names are all, somewhat notable to those of us who follow it all very closely. The other thing, and I'm not just saying this because of the topic tonight, that has really surprised me is how male-dominated Ottawa is. I've worked in Ottawa a long time, and I didn't appreciate it so much until I got into government, until I was living in Ottawa and surrounded by it more, until I started counting in the meetings. And I don't know if it was just my experience in the Ontario Public Service where I was at education, and so perhaps it was just, it was my unique experience there. But I didn't feel it to the same degree that I feel it in Ottawa, where rooms are, it's surprising when it's more than 30% women in a room.
I think we have time. Do we have time for a couple more questions? All right, so back over here, and then I'll go to this side. I'm sorry we're not going to get to all of them, but I think Katie's staying for a little bit afterwards. So,
can you hear me? So thank you for your talk. I work in the healthcare profession, and something really shocked me last week. So I work with 95% men, 5% female, in men who do think they are superheroes. Not just superheroes, they think they're gods. They're surgeons, etc. So what shocked me last week is, this is going to be controversial, but I was at a conference in New York, and there was just 2 women in a group of 20 men who went out for dinner. And after dinner, the conversation turned to the younger woman and as to whether her breasts were fake or not. And I've heard this before, once a few drinks have been had, but I've learned over the time to dress very conservatively. And so the question is really, is the onus on us to not dress like that, or is the onus on trying to change attitudes, because they exist? And I'm sure they existed in the whole room, and it was disgusting to see, but I don't think we can pretend it doesn't happen.
I have a lot of different answers to that too, but starting with the most important one, I think, which is the onus is 100% not on you. It is entirely on changing attitudes, and that is entirely unacceptable. I don't care if drinks are involved. It's that clear and simple to me. And it doesn't mean, though, in terms of the last point you made on, we should not pretend that's not happening. That is, of course, happening out there. I'm sorry and sad to say, but it is happening out there. But we should not accept that. None of us should accept that, nor should our colleagues accept that. So there aren't easy answers on how to deal with those situations, especially in the moment. But what I would encourage you, your colleagues, and any of us in these circumstances is to find the right people that we work with to talk to ensure that it's understood it is unacceptable. And I would also say there are lawyers in the room who I would encourage you to talk to. I am not one of those people, but it's really actually important that people do follow through, whether it's your human relations department or, consulting a lawyer. Harassment is not acceptable, period. So, simple as that.
Let's go to this side of the room. We'll take one right here. And then I'll go into the back after that.
Merci. Bonjour. My question is, first of all, I work for a federal department, so I'm a proud civil servant. So my question is involving women, but in the sense of, is there a deliberate plan for the next stage to hire women of visible minority? And I ask this question because I had a situation where I'm a woman, obviously. I'm a chartered professional accountant and a project management professional, so I have designations to my name. I applied for a prominent position. I was turned down, and it was given to a man who is less qualified, but probably more on the basis that they spoke French. I report into Ottawa, and of course I respect bilingualism, but I felt a little discouraged. So are there deliberate plans to help women in my situation where we would like to see women of visible minority have opportunities, but also not face those obstacles in the federal departments? Merci. I'm learning French, by the way.
I caught that. So yes, is the short answer, and the slightly longer answer is that the Prime Minister actually holds 4 what we call stock takes on 4 themes that he's directly keeping track of, and where they come around his boardroom table, the various people responsible for these issues, and update him on a regular basis at these stock takes on how they're doing and how we're doing. And one of those is called diversity and inclusion. And I can tell you that my favorite day on the job that I was referring to when I was talking about the superheroes earlier was because the Prime Minister actually joined me at one of those breakfasts. And it was just awesome. He just came in to this diner, and it was the Major General and I who kind of planned it so that it wasn't a known thing, so that people weren't coming in with sort of things from their jobs. It was able to just be a usual breakfast, and he got to come in and learn from them. And this really will relate back to your question. And then later that morning, literally a couple of hours later, he had a diversity and inclusion stock take. And at that diversity and inclusion stock take, and I'm not giving away cabinet secrets here because we did tweet about it and talked about it. So at that diversity and inclusion stock take, what he did was he actually had the heads of all the different parts of the federal government to do with security, both uniform and civilian, come in and talk to him about how they were doing on diversity and inclusion with all the relevant ministers there as well. And we asked for the numbers in advance. He likes numbers too. And so that we didn't have to spend the time hearing reports, so that we could actually dig right in on what do we need to do to improve. I can tell you there have been other conversations about the federal public service writ large. I'm particularly interested in the finance and economic side of the public service, because that's one of the other areas where I have felt like we're lagging, at least at the more management levels. Needless to say, it's very much on our radar and in front of us.
I know there's someone in the back who's had a question for a bit, and then we'll come back to this side.
Hi. You mentioned when you were speaking earlier that you sort of got your start by meeting a lot of different people and asking them for things until you got a job, essentially. As a young professional, I would say that it's easy enough to go up and meet people. What I find difficult is taking those meetings and turning them into connections that are fruitful and find you those jobs and those opportunities. Do you have any advice for somebody like me or anyone else in the room on how to do that? How do you meet someone and then make a fruitful, lasting connection from that?
That's a really great question. I think I would take some of the thinking I had around for managers in terms of recruitment when I was talking about the being persistent and taking your time, and apply it the other way as well. Be persistent, keep those connections, build those networks. I think all of that applies in the other direction. But one thing I would add on is, and I just actually read something saying this the other day, and it stuck in my mind when you asked that question, which is, look for the right bosses too. You know, introduce yourself to everybody, but really get to know them and research them, and you're gonna find that one that connects. Because I'm guessing if you're somewhere like here, you've got certain things that you're looking for in an organization. And if you look for those leaders, they're likely looking for someone like you. So I would encourage you to do that extra bit of research into the leaders that you're meeting, and put yourself in different environments and stay in touch. Stay in touch with folks. Write those follow-up notes. Don't feel bad when they don't write back right away, and I'm not just saying that to let myself off the hook for not always writing back to. I have a lot of unread emails in my inbox, I've got to admit. I say it also because you know, sometimes it just does take a couple of times.
Do you still have the microphone by chance? Can you just tell us what you do? I just have to ask because there's a room full of people and who knows?
I'm in communications. I work for a media company, Chorus Global News and Chorus Radio, publicity, internal and external communications. And I just want to say, since you guys are putting me on the spot, that I actually do have one of those bosses, and she's here sitting beside me.
Awesome. All right, so I think there's, two people beside each other right here on this side who have been waiting. Would you mind, after you ask your question, just passing it to the woman beside you? Thank you.
She was just helping me out. Support. Katie, thank you so much. It was really a thrill to hear you speak. I remember the article that was done on you, the Globe and Mail did about you, I guess, about a year ago. And can you hear me? And I was super excited that you were in office, and really proud to say that I lived in a country that had you in the position that you were in. My name is Shauna. I'm president and CEO of Design Exchange, and I was also really happy when you said that gender parity will be possible by design, because I believe that's true. My question to you is actually speaks to the global goals for sustainable development that the UN launched in 2015. Goal number 5 is gender equality. And just wanted to know a little bit about the federal perspective on what we're doing about that in terms of reaching gender equality by 2030.
So, thank you, first of all. On your question specifically around those good old it's SDGs, right? Yeah. I remember hearing those. I'm getting all the acronyms. I mean, we're very, I mean, it won't surprise you to know that we're very committed to it, and we've got a number of ministers actually over the next couple of weeks who are going to be spending a fair bit of time at the UN on these things, and not only ministers. Stay tuned on a few other things that are happening, but there's a lot of work to be done. But the UN and Canada are actually working probably more closely than they have, I think it's fair to say, in a very, very long time. And that's obviously a specific area in which they're turning to us on a fair bit now. So I feel like, I feel good about it. I feel like we're talking about it more than we once were, including at the UN. The Prime Minister's been down a couple of times on panels on that very subject, and including it in his speeches each time he's there as well, let alone around the world. Which is almost in some ways more important, is talking about it in places other than at the UN where there's already agreement. Well, I shouldn't say that, but there's already agreement amongst those who are at those particular panel discussions more often than not. You know, there's only a couple of countries that tend to beat us to the punch, both in terms of having better numbers across from us in the bilaterals, because yes, I track those numbers too, and how we do against other countries, but also in terms of raising these issues first. And actually, the Swedish there's some representatives from Sweden who are in town, in Ottawa town, at the moment, talking to a lot of our folks around those goals at the moment. So there's a lot of sharing going on between countries in a way that I'm told hasn't happened in the recent past anyways. So I think people are feeling better, but there's a long way to go, as you know.
We only have time for one more question, and I think that this woman here already has the microphone, so it's all you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you for doing this. It's very nice. My question is, before I left work today, I have a very great manager who's a male, and he was very excited about me coming to this event today, and he said, tell me all about it when you come back to work. So my question, and I'm sitting in a very gentleman-friendly area of the of the group today, is what's your advice? We all know as women, we're all for this. We feel it. We want to, gender diversity is important. But what's your advice to our male counterparts here as to how they can get involved in what they can do, to help with this, parity that we're talking about?
So the men who are here, I'm guessing for the most part, already know at least some answers, and I'm almost tempted to put them on the spot, except that the good news is there's quite a number of them here. So I encourage you to talk to them afterwards and get their answers directly. What I would say to those men that aren't here and to those of you giving them advice, a small thing but a big thing is actually that quick list of observations or questions that I raised around meetings. Men being the one in meetings, making sure that everyone's sitting around the table, that everyone's getting a chance to talk, that thoughts aren't being interrupted inappropriately, or at least when they are, that you come back to that thought. It's super helpful. And it's not just helpful, it's empowering. It actually changes the tone and demeanor of a room when men are playing that active role as an active meeting participant, whether or not they are the chair. When they are facilitating a room, anybody can facilitate in a room. It doesn't have to be the chair of a meeting. Especially though, if they're the chair of the meeting, they should make sure they're doing those things. But I think those things that are relatively small when you kind of say them, when I write them down, they're actually huge in their meaning. You hear from people much later about having had the opportunity to sit at the table with, or about having had the opportunity to express their opinion on. And you're all in different kind of positions of leadership, and the men that I'm sure that are asking that kind of advice are too. And it doesn't take much to make sure that someone's feeling heard. And too often, it's young women who are the ones not being heard in those rooms. So that, to me, would be the first place to focus.
Well, thank you so much to everyone here. Sorry we have no more time for questions, but we got quite a few in, and many that were submitted online as well. On behalf of Lean In Canada, thank you for being here. I'm sure we have a final few words about what's coming up next, because we have a bit of a networking event. So thank you so much, Katie.
So thank you again to Katie and Amber for giving us a glimpse into your professional journeys and perspective. And I think there were some really great questions that were asked in this room, and I appreciate you answering them with such candor and thoughtfulness. On behalf of Lean In Canada, we'd like to present you with this small token of our appreciation that is coming around the corner anytime soon. Here we are. There are a few other important people that we'd like to thank for helping us make this evening happen. To our national sponsors, as well as our event partner, Fitness on the Go, whose booth you may have seen near the entrance, thank you. To Tealish for providing our speaker gifts, thank you. To Ali Ho and Farah Ghazal, whose photos of tonight's event will be showcased on our Facebook page, thank you very much. And to our volunteers who are the lifeblood of our organization, it's truly inspiring to me to see so many people who are passionate about helping women succeed in their careers. Last but certainly not least, Thank you to all of you who have joined us tonight, for being part of the Lean in Canada community, and for investing with us in a better and more equal future for us all. Before we get back to networking, I'd love for you to save the date for our next event. It will be happening on March 28th at the Spoke Club, and further details for the event will be posted on our website, leanincanada.com, as well as through our newsletter. So please make sure to sign up for notifications if you enjoyed the event tonight. One last thing I need to mention is that we want to be as environmentally friendly as possible. So if you could please drop your name tags in the black bag on your way out, we would really, really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, and we'll hope you'll stick around for a few drinks, get to know each other a bit more, and let us know what you thought of the event. We hope to see you again soon.